Our theme this month is Love in Action, and today's topic is the consciousness of love. At the beginning of this series, I called your attention to this little book, for those of you who were here the first Sunday. This book is titled 365 Science of Mind, A Year of Daily Wisdom from Ernest Holmes. And it's starting with January 1 and going through December 31st. There is something different written for each day of the year in the way of positive affirmations. Sometimes they sound like a spiritual mind treatment, and sometimes they just sound like a wonderful boost for your day. But they are incredibly spiritual and timely. And in view of the fact that February is often thought of as the month of love, wrapped around the holiday we call Valentine's Day, naturally, I looked at the vignettes in this book for inspiration, for guidance, for the meaning of the words, the consciousness of love, today's topic. And as always, I was not disappointed as I began researching the writings of the enlightened person that Ernest Holmes truly was. The very first page in that monthly, the February month of pages, is titled, God's Presence in Me is Love. The action of love expresses in my world. God's wisdom holds me steady, and from this infinite source, I give and receive love in my world. In essence, what that's saying is there is no separation, there is no distance, there is no categorizing difference between what I know as God, this creative life energy, and me. It is constantly in motion. So, have we got a problem there? Are we okay? Okay. All right. So, such a simple statement from this infinite source that I call God or spirit or creative energy, or, you can call it Louise if you want to. It doesn't care what you call it, but it's that source of being. And I think probably source of being is the most descriptive phrase that we use to talk about this connection that we have with an eternal, infinite, creative energy. And, I give and receive love in my world. Such a simple statement, so powerful. And do you know, there are still some people in the world who don't believe that? Do you know there are some people in the world who think they tried to believe that and it didn't work? Yet God within us is never troubled. So nothing and no one can take love from us or keep it from our hearts. The God within us does the living. I can turn to that source within me, and love enters freely. There's no restriction on it. And this realization is the beginning of my consciousness of love. I am always connected with that infinite source of love. And I say I, just like in the spiritual mind treatment I did earlier this morning, and you may take that as your own. So I'm now conscious that such a power is always and immediately available to me. So though things and perhaps people around me change, ebb, and flow, the nature of this invisible divine energy is goodness, truth, beauty, and love. And it's infinite. How many of you remember the song, "I'd like to teach the world to sing"? Anybody remember that? Yes. Those of us who admit to being a little over the age of 50 or so. Do you also remember that when it first came out in 1971, it was titled, "I'd like to buy the world a Coke"? Did you remember that? How cool is that? And it portrayed a positive message of hope and love, featuring a multicultural collection of teenagers on top of a hill singing the song. Well, later on in the 1970s, Ray Conniff, and if you raised your hand, you know who Ray Conniff was, and if you don't know who Ray Conniff was, that's because you probably weren't around then. But he introduced it with the new words, and later it was reintroduced by a group called the New Seekers, which probably is familiar to those of you who didn't raise your hand when I talked about Ray Conniff and the early days. So through the years, we've heard a variety of different groups singing it, and it's become legendary. Surely John Pemberton, who invented the original Coca-Cola syrup formula, and that was way back in the 1880s. Nobody has to raise your hands about being here then. But I'm sure John would be proud to know that his formula also gave birth to such a famous and long-lasting song about love. So as I began preparing this talk, the words to that song began to play in my mind, which is why I bring it up this morning. I always take notice of something like that because I know from experience that it's going to be heeded in some way, first by me and then by others as well. So I went to the source of all knowledge, that's Google for me, and printed out the lyrics. And let me share these lyrics with you. I'd like to teach the world to sing in perfect harmony. I'd like to hold it in my arms and keep it company. I'd like to build the world a home and furnish it with love. Grow apple trees and honeybees and snow white turtle doves. I'd like to see the world for once all standing hand in hand and hear them echo through the hills for peace throughout the land. Such a gentle consciousness of love. And I'd like to suggest to you that you can feel the flow of energy and love filling your entire being whenever you invite it. Allow it. There's nothing that stops us from singing these words regularly or repeating them, whatever you choose, perhaps daily. I'd like to see the world for once, all standing hand in hand, and hear them echo through the hills for peace throughout the land. Because here's the thing, folks. We can believe that others can do this. We can hope or we can wish that others would do this. We can wait for others to do this. Our job, however, is to do it ourselves. See the peoples of the world standing hand in hand. Hear them expressing peace and singing in harmony, filled with love. What is the harm in that? What is at others' expense in that? What if, when you started affirming it, even you think it's a pipe dream? Because as Holmes suggests, this divine compulsion is laid upon everyone to use the power of God to know that it fills our lives with peace, with harmony, with joy. And when we realize this, then one by one, each one of us understands our personal relationship with that divine presence. The presence that fills our own lives with the consciousness of light and love. So even if you were to begin doing this, thinking that it was a pipe dream, it's worthwhile to stay with it. One verse at a time, one day at a time, one sense of change in a time. Because the change comes in us individually first, before it can replicate around us. Ernest Holmes believed that love is the motivating power of life. He believed, or he lived that belief in his own life, and he dedicated his life to offering that path to anyone and everyone willing to pursue it. Just happened to have another book of his. You know I have a whole bookcase full of books of his. This little book titled Spiritual Awareness is excerpts from a number of other books that he wrote. And here are some of his thoughts in here on love. We can only make the most perfect use of the law of mind when we are motivated by love. The essence of love flows in transcendental loveliness into my world of thought and form, ever renewing, vitalizing, bringing joy and harmony, blessing everything and everyone that it touches. And I realize, he said, that my circle of love cannot be complete when there is any place where it is clogged. So I freely let go of everything that contradicts the nature of love. There's no bondage in my love, nor any sense of proprietorship. There's no jealousy or envy, for I know that love establishes me, upholds and supports me, guides and directs my pathway. I choose to love all humanity, he said, and to see the divine image in everyone. An ever-growing expansion of the consciousness of love. And frankly, folks, these are not new or untested ideas. From ancient Hindu, Buddhist, from ancient Greece, from the Hebrew sages of old, these concepts were broadly named, discussed, and practiced. From ancient Sanskrit, we hear the words bhakti and prema. From Greek philosophers, agape and philautia. From the Hebrew sages, the word raha. And many of you are familiar with the writings of Rumi, a 13th century Sufi, which is a part of the Muslim faith. So you see, this is not a new concept, this concept of love, of the consciousness of love, of the expressing consciously this highest level of love. How could it be new when divine spirit is eternal? It's infinite. It's ongoing. We may be new to it, that marvelous self-discovery that every spiritual being having a human experience gets to experience when and if he or she chooses. These sages of ancient times saw the consciousness of love play out at very high levels in enlightened thinking and behaviors. So now enter the modern era, as Queen Elizabeth likes to say, the modern era. Now we have the works of people like Deepak Chopra, for example, talking about his latest book, The Healing Self. This is his 51st book. And I saw him on a morning TV show that I was telling some of you about before the service started, a morning TV show called Home and Family last week. So he is bringing his ideas and ahas to a whole new series of generations through programs like that. We have Lisa Rankin, who many of you are familiar with, Mind Over Medicine, and Reverend Michael Beckwith, showing up on Oprah Super Soul Sunday. Many of you are familiar with Michael Beckwith, who has the Agape International Center, a New Thought Center in Santa Monica, California, on the Pacific Coast. We have what are called Focus New Thought ministers doing their spiritual work in the workplace, in schools, with health supporting organizations, and in local communities. And we have writers like Ruth Miller, who modernizes the writings of Emma Curtis Hopkins, so people new to these works can understand them more easily. We have Kenneth Hansen, and I want to share this book with you in case you have some interest in it. Kenneth Hansen wrote this book called Kabbalah, 3,000 years of mystic tradition. And it's written in such a way that we can read it in the 21st century and understand it. So he's modernizing the story of Kabbalah in terms of verbiage understandable to today's seekers of mystic tradition. And for those of you who may not be familiar with Kabbalah, this is the mystical side of Judaism, sometimes referred to as the metaphysical side of Judaism. So everywhere one looks, if one is willing to do so, there are modern day descriptions of ancient wisdom coming through, moving through unending generations and being brought forward into this moment. You know, one of the things that we say is that truth is truth, and wherever it shows up is just fine. And this is why Holmes did the work that he did in canvassing and studying and learning about so many areas of religion and philosophy, and finding that thread of truth that runs through each one of them. And that is the thread of truth, not threads of truth. Truth is truth wherever you find it. And you find it in many religions and philosophies at some level and to some degree. You really might consider allowing yourself to be filled with the spirit of love and gladness. You might want to be filled with the expectancy for good things. You might want to see and feel the energy of life flowing through you every day, all the time. You might want to rejoice in this day and every day that you've been given. Then, by doing these things, what you're expressing is the desire to demonstrate the consciousness of love. And so it is.